The mess hall was loud in the way only a military mess hall could be, metal trays clattering, boots scraping against the tiled floor, laughter echoing too hard, too confident. It was late afternoon, that in-between hour when training was done but exhaustion hadn't yet dulled egos. The recruits filled the long tables, shoulders squared, uniforms still stiff with newness. Everyone was trying to prove something. She stepped inside quietly. Her boots were scuffed, her sleeves rolled with precision, her hair tied back into a regulation bun, so tight it pulled at her scalp. Nothing about her screamed special, no medals, no rank that stood out. Just another woman in uniform, at least that's what they saw. She grabbed a tray and moved down the line, accepting food without complaint. The cook barely looked up to him. She was another face in a sea of green. To the room, she was an anomaly, alone, composed, and unbothered by the noise around her. She chose an empty spot at the far end of a long table. That's when the eyes started following her. 4 recruits noticed her almost at the same time. They were loud, broad-shouldered, fresh out of training, still carrying the arrogance of men who had never truly been tested. They whispered first, then laughed. One nudged the other with his elbow, didn't know they were letting civilians in now. One of them muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. She heard it, of course she did. But her expression didn't change. She sat straight, backed, eating slowly, deliberately, every movement controlled, not rushed, not nervous. That unsettled them more than if she had reacted. They shifted closer. One took the seat directly across from her without asking. Another sat to her right, then another to her left. The 4th leaned against the table, blocking her exit. Surrounded, she looked up for the first time. Her eyes were calm, not afraid, not defensive, just observant, like she was taking measurements, distance, angles, weight. The recruit across from her smirked. "You lost, soldier." Silence stretched, fork paused midair. "No," she said evenly. Her voice was steady, low, unshaken. That was it. Just one word, no explanation, no apology. They laughed. "Didn't mean to scare you," another said, though his grin said the opposite. "Just thought you might need company." She set her fork down carefully, too carefully. Around them, the mess hall buzzed on, unaware. Conversations overlapped. Someone spilled a drink. Someone else laughed too loud. No one noticed the tension building at the far end of the room. One of the recruits leaned in closer. "You don't look like you belong here." That was the moment, not because the words hurt her, but because they revealed exactly how little they understood. She had heard worse, on bases overseas, in training fields soaked with rain and sweat, in moments where weakness meant failure and failure meant death. She had learned early that underestimation was a gift, one she accepted without correcting. Her hands rested loosely on the table, relaxed, but inside her mind, something shifted. A switch flipped, awareness sharpened. 45 seconds, she thought. That's all it would take. She glanced around the room, not in fear, but habit. She noted the exits, the weight of the table, the spacing between bodies, the recruits' postures, lazy, overconfident, sloppy. None of them were ready. The one blocking her exit scoffed. "You gonna say something?" Or she stood. The movement was sudden, smooth, explosive in its precision. Chairs scraped back, the table rattled, the recruits froze, not because they understood what was coming, but because instinct told them something was wrong. Her face was still calm, but now her eyes were different, and for the first time doubt flickered across their expressions. They had surrounded her thinking she was weak. They had no idea they had just stepped into the space of a woman forged by missions they could barely imagine. And in less than a minute, the entire mess hall would know it. The mess hall didn't fall silent immediately. At first, it was just the scrape of chairs and a few annoyed glances from nearby tables. The four recruits chuckled, assuming her sudden movement was nothing more than frustration or bravado. They were wrong. The moment she stood, her body language changed completely. The softness vanished. Her shoulders squared, her stance grounded, not aggressive but ready, like a door quietly locking. The recruit blocking her exit reached out instinctively, palm open, careless. He never saw the strike coming. In one fluid motion, she twisted his wrist and stepped inside his balance. There was a sharp crack, bone meeting pressure, and he was on the table before his mind could register pain. Trays flew, food scattered across the steel surface. Gasps rippled through the room. "Hey!" one of them shouted. Too late. The second recruit lunged, anger replacing arrogance. She pivoted, using the table as leverage, and drove an elbow into his chest with surgical precision. The air left his lungs in a violent wheeze as he collapsed backward, crashing into another chair. The third froze. That hesitation cost him everything. She moved like she had rehearsed this 1,000 times, because she had. Years of training compressed into instinct. She swept his legs out from under him, pinned him with her knee, and twisted his arm just enough to make him understand exactly how fragile he was. The fourth recruit finally realized this wasn't a joke. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a mistake. He swung wildly, untrained, emotional. She caught his wrist, redirected the force, and slammed him face first onto the table. The impact echoed through the mess hall. Conversations stopped. Forks hovered midair. Every eye turned toward the chaos unfolding at the far end of the room. 45 seconds. That was all it took. Four men who had walked in laughing were now either pinned, gasping, or frozen in shock. Food littered the floor. Trays lay overturned like discarded shields after a battle. She stood at the center of it all, breathing steady, posture controlled. Not a hint of panic, not a wasted movement. A hush fell over the room. Someone whispered, "What the hell just happened?" She released her hold and stepped back, giving them space. An unspoken warning. None of them moved. They couldn't. Pride had drained from their faces, replaced by something far heavier. Fear, respect, confusion. She adjusted her uniform calmly, brushing a smear of sauce from her sleeve like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Her hands didn't shake, her eyes didn't dart. She looked exactly like someone who had been here before, many times, in far worse places. A drill instructor burst through the mess hall doors, voice sharp and commanding. "What's going on here?" No one answered immediately. The recruits stared at the floor. Finally, one soldier spoke quietly, almost reverently. "They surrounded her, sir." The instructor's gaze moved to her, took in her stance, her stillness, the way she held herself like she owned every inch of space around her. Then his eyes dropped to the patch on her uniform. Everything changed. His posture straightened instantly. His tone shifted. "At ease." The recruits looked up, confused. "At ease?" He repeated. She nodded once. The realization hit them like a second blow. She wasn't just another recruit. She wasn't lost. She wasn't weak. She was something else entirely. And as the truth settled in the kind forged through brutal training, silent missions, and survival against impossible odds, the mess hall understood they hadn't witnessed a fight. They had witnessed restraint. Because if she had truly unleashed everything she was capable of, 45 seconds would have been more than enough. No one spoke at first. The mess hall felt different now, smaller somehow, like the walls had drawn closer to witness what had just happened. The air still carried the smell of spilled food and metal trays, but beneath it was something heavier: awareness, embarrassment, awe. The four recruits stayed exactly where they were. One sat hunched over, rubbing his wrist, his jaw clenched tight, not just from pain, but from the sting of humiliation. Another stared at the table, eyes unfocused, replaying the moment where confidence had failed him. The third hadn't moved at all, as if still waiting for permission from his body to stand. The fourth avoided looking at her entirely. They didn't look angry anymore. They looked small. She stood a few steps away, hands clasped behind her back, breathing slow and controlled. There was no victory in her eyes, no satisfaction, just discipline. What she had done wasn't personal, it never was. The drill instructor broke the silence. "What were you thinking?" His voice was calm, which made it worse. No one answered. He turned to her. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She shook her head once. "No, sir." That single word, "ma'am," hit the recruits harder than any strike. They exchanged quick glances, confusion spreading across their faces. The instructor nodded, then faced the four men again. "You realize who this is." They didn't, and that was the problem. He gestured toward her shoulder. "You see that patch?" Slowly, reluctantly, their eyes followed his hand. Recognition crept in, not immediately, but in fragments. A symbol they had seen in training videos, in whispered stories, in the kind of missions instructors never explained in detail. Special operations. Elite. The room seemed to tilt. One of the recruits swallowed hard. Navy. SEAL. The instructor didn't smile. Yes. The word landed with weight. Suddenly, the fight made sense. The speed. The control. The restraint. She hadn't overpowered them. She had outclassed them. The recruits straightened instinctively, shame burning behind their eyes. One of them finally found his voice. "We didn't know, ma'am." She met his gaze. Her expression softened, but only slightly. That didn't matter. Her voice wasn't harsh. It was honest. "You didn't know who I was," she continued, "but you decided who I was. That hurt more than the bruises ever would." Around the room, soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, others looked away. The message wasn't just for the four recruits. It was for everyone who had watched without stepping in. She picked up her tray from the floor, setting it back on the table. Most of the food was ruined now, scattered and cold. She stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. Then she exhaled. The instructor cleared his throat. "You're dismissed, ma'am." She paused, then shook her head. "With respect, sir, I'd like to finish my meal." A few quiet murmurs rippled through the room. The instructor studied her, then nodded. "Granted." She sat down. The recruits remained standing, unsure what to do with themselves. Finally, one stepped forward. His voice was low, sincere. "I'm sorry." She looked up at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something deeper. "Learn from it," she said. "That's all." He nodded sharply. So did the others. As she ate, the mess hall slowly returned to life, but nothing was quite the same. Laughter was quieter, conversations more thoughtful. Eyes lingered longer on the woman at the far end of the table. Not because she had fought, but because she had shown them something they hadn't expected to see in a woman standing alone. Strength without noise, power without cruelty, confidence without arrogance. They realized too late that they had mistaken silence for weakness, and as she finished her meal, surrounded now by space instead of threats, one truth settled heavily over the room: the most dangerous people don't announce themselves.